Hello everyone, it's Mr. E here, and today I have a video for you on Curios. Now, those of you who watched Tanner Lindbergh's video yesterday on Curios, you may have heard all you need to hear about Curios, but I have a slightly different perspective, at least for one portion of the player base. Now, before I go any further, I have to, in all good conscience, recommend that you go check out his deep dive into the Curio meta updated 2024. Here's his channel right here. You can see I'm subscribed. Perhaps you should too. I think it's a well put together video. He's very even keeled. I will warn you, however, though there is some strong language at a part. He does call someone a silly Billy. I can't, in all good conscience, condone that. But outside of that, I think it's a really well put together video, and it will show you, tutorialize you on what each of these different stats is going to do. We're going to avoid talking about specifics of what these stats do today. I will treat what I'm showing here as, just sort of a summation, more of a companion piece to this video, because I felt like I had a few things I wanted to say, specifically to one big portion of the player base that I feel like underserved is not the right word, but I don't want to lead them into playing for the hypothetical optimal because they're just not there yet, right? Tanner Lindbergh, or I guess I'm Mr. E, so he can be Mr. L. Mr. L, he's very, very good at the hypothetical optimal, and he plays close to that optimal. However, there's a lot of people out there who do not play anywhere near that optimal, and so choosing optimal, I'm using air quotes here, optimal builds could be a disservice to them in the sense that it could be a little bit too high skill requiring for them to have much success with. A good example of this would be a recommendation to run 2 stamina trinkets on Zealot at a very high level of play. That's definitely an optimal thing to do. The more stamina you have, the better. But at a lower level of play, stamina is just not going to be anything you're going to use all that much of outside of sprinting. These are players who may not be very comfortable with the mechanics of blocking and push stabbing and all that good stuff, or sprint sliding, sprint flicking, all those good things. So I actually have 2 different tables today. The first one here is for players, you can see in the top left corner, it's for players that play on difficulty 5 and above. And these are players who are pushing towards mastery, who are playing on the difficulty where the damage is maxed out. If you didn't know, on Damnation and above, including Oryx and Auric Maelstroms, all the damage that the enemies put out is the same. It's just that the tier of enemies and the number of enemies increases as you go into Oryx and Auric Maelstroms and all that good stuff. So we have to consider, that the damage is pretty much maxed out here, and the way in which these players take damage is fundamentally different than my players who play at difficulty 4 and below. Because in these difficulties 4s and below, the damage scales down, so there's not as much damage if you do get hit. However, these players still manage to die and lose missions. And what I've done is I've built Curios, which, Curios are essentially a defensive tool, right? I've built Curios for them that's going to help shore up against some of those instances because they have a specific way they die. So from that, before I get into breaking down these lists, we're going to do them one at a time. I'll first touch on my top tier players, and then we'll go to the players who are 4 and below. Let me just say, if you like this sort of breakdown, if you like Mr. L, maybe you'll like Mr. E, consider giving both of us a subscribe and commenting and all that good stuff. And I really, really appreciate it. We have been growing a lot lately. Maybe Mr. E will be beating out Mr. L in subs by next year sometime. Who knows? The rivalry continues. So, with that aside, let's jump right into talking about this the fundamental difference between these 2 sets of players, and it comes down to the ways that they take damage. And ultimately, remember, our goal as players, in order to win the game, is to get to the end of the level without losing all of our HP, right? If everybody on the team loses all of their HP or is disabled, then the game is over. So the baseline that we need to do is we need to keep some HP and get to the end. The way that high skill players do that is by stacking a lot of toughness and ways to prevent them from taking that damage in the first place. Because high skill players, when they do take damage, they'll take like incidental or chip damage, Just like a barrel kind of exploding nearby you. You take a shot from a marksman who's pretty far away, and then like a melee enemy sneaks a hit in when you thought your toughness was full, but it was like at 98%, and you take 5 HP damage. And that sort of chip damage is going to be the primary way in which we lose our HP and get closer and closer to dying on high difficulties. And high skill players are really, really good at, when they do take an incidence of damage, they'll take that as a cue to disengage or assess the situation and move back and approach from a different angle, bide out their time so they can regenerate their toughness. And that's part of what has made toughness so dominant in the current meta, is almost all types of damage that you take now need to break your toughness first in some way, excepting like barrel explosions and stuff like that, which I think Mr. L covers in his video. So toughness ranks really high for these players, and they're just really, really generally good at not taking damage outside of isolated incidents. Compare that to my players who are playing on difficulty 4 and below. They still manage to lose games, but it is not through a war of attrition. It usually happens in what I like to call catastrophic fuck-ups. These players, they do not have the prerequisite skills for something like horde management or situational awareness or level knowledge, and so they'll do things like back themselves into a corner and end up like perma blocking instead of actually like trying to kill the enemies and get their way out of there. They will put themselves into a spot where there's gunners pinning them down or flamers, and then they'll take a lot of damage all at once, breaking their toughness fully, and then just getting the absolute crap beat out of them. And I've seen this happen a number of times, especially on players who generally play at these levels and then have tried to push to difficulty 5, and they're just overwhelmed by the numbers of enemies and the damage that they're dealing. Once your toughness is broken, if you do not have the skills and the knowledge and the wherewithal to continue regenerating your toughness, if you're a psyker and your toughness is broken and your first instinct is block instead of I need to start casting so I can regenerate my toughness, right? Suddenly the situation changes from how much damage can I ablate by having this toughness shield around me to how much effective HP do I have to get wailed on before I can deal enough damage to get myself out of the situation or get some stamina back to shove my way out of the situation or have teammates save me or whatever. So generally on these difficulties, I'm stacking more of whatever just gives us more of effective HP, with the assumption that these players are going to catastrophically fuck up at some point. They are going to get themselves into a corner, and compared to if you were like me and you play on 5 and above, we take one hit and we're like, whoa, I didn't see that hit coming. Okay, back off and reassess. These players, they'll take a hit, they'll get staggered by it, they'll swing around, and they'll take another hit, and they'll take another hit. So they'll take multiple hits at one time. So we have to build according to that. So let's first, with that out of the way, let's first just touch on the Damnation and above players. Pretty much identical to what Mr. L said in his video. Toughness and stamina for all classes. Questionable over here on Ogre and Psyker. I'll talk about why in a second. But as you get more comfortable with not taking damage, especially on Zealot, who's exceedingly easy not to take damage on, swapping out, maybe you start with 2 toughness, 1 stamina. Swapping to 2 stamina, 1 toughness is really, really good for Zealot. For Veteran, I would probably recommend staying at 2 toughness, 1 stamina, because he has so many multipliers to his toughness, and he can really extend it a long way. For Ogren, I'm not certain if you want that extra stamina, just because even a +3 stamina Curio it only extends your stamina by, like, let's say a little bit less than 50% based on the weapon you're using, because he has 4 base plus whatever weapon he's using. And then he also has the problem of having generally slow stamina regen. So I think that he's, honestly, I play him with no stamina Curios, and I've never found myself in a situation, as long as I have my stamina regen on my Curios, where I'm running out of stamina in combats. Generally I feel like it's better to stack all toughness, but you could use 1 if you really wanted to. Same thing with Psyker. There's lots of builds, and the reason I put question mark here, there's lots of builds where you almost never are in melee, right? Think about like the fire staff or like void blast staff. These are these are builds where like your melee is just casting void blast on the thing that's directly in front of you and knocking it down, right? You're not really getting anything out of stamina. It's probably going to be better to have that extra 17% toughness than 3 stam. But if you swap into melee or you find yourself going into melee at all, stamina is a great resource, and it only gets better as you gain skill as a player. Then for S tier stuff, all the classes should be using extra toughness. Across all 3 Curios, it effectively adds up to 1 whole additional Curio. They should all be using percentage CDR. This is just more ultimates, and ultimates are incredibly powerful and impactful in this game. Some of them just are downright game-breaking. They should all, excepting maybe Psyker, be using stamina regen, although I do see, I do obviously recommend it if at all possible as your last one, unless you really want something else. The reason I recommend stamina regen is because this is the only source of extra stamina regen in the game. And it's absolutely goated. You will 100% want this. Stamina is your most important resource at high levels. Sprint is another really great option down in A tier here. Sprint is a really great option for all of these classes. For Zealot and Ogryn specifically, because they're melee classes. They need to sprint to get in there, right? They're going to be doing a lot of sprinting and sliding to avoid damage. For Veteran, I choose Sprint not necessarily because he's getting into melee so much, but because Veteran is an old man who has a maximum of 2 stamina, and he has a 1 second regeneration delay. So he ends up like running out of stamina really quickly, and then he gets into the combat, and he's like completely winded, and he stays winded for a really long time. So it'd be nice to show up in combat and not be completely winded, right? So he's all right in there. Ogryn has a HP on A tier here, just because for him, and only him, that effectively comes out to 45 HP, just flat HP when you have all 3 Curios, and then that further is multiplied by some of his damage reductions, which you can extend this HP quite a bit, up to like 90, 100 area. The Psyker, I generally think that maybe Sprint isn't that great on him. Probably go with stamina regen as your third, but Sprint is probably the other one I would choose there. Let's drop down to B tier. I think Block is B tier for all players on 5 and above, just because as you gain skill, blocking becomes less and less utilized, because there's lots and lots of techniques in this game that can create gaps between you, even you and fast enemies like ragers. You could do backsliding, you could do flick sliding, expend a little bit of stamina or a dodge count, and you can create a lot of distance in which you won't need to be blocking. Generally, time spent blocking is time spent not getting damage done to enemies, and the better you are as a player, the less you will be still need to block maybe sometimes, but you'll be able to line up those shots and do what you need to do with less blocking. HP in B tier, it's usable on Zealot, though I wouldn't recommend it over anything else. And then bombs. Bombs, I rate them kind of B tier on both of these lists, just because bombs are a threat now. Flame grenades do find you from time to time if you're not moving around, but specifically gas grenades are a real pain. There's a near 100% chance you are going to end up inhaling some pox gas at some point during every run. Those guys just have fucking Peyton Manning arms, and they have like laser sights to where they're aiming. You'll throw it from across the map, it'll bounce through a window and end up at your feet, and then it'll cover like the whole area, the level you're in. It's very annoying. So I could understand building around that defense. While we're on this, I do want to bring up something that I don't remember seeing in Mr. L's video, which is that damage reduction is a weird thing in this game. The way the calculation works is this. You can see I've had another take at this video. When you take reduction to damage, the game first looks at how much damage you take. Let's say you take 100 in this instance, and then it multiplies it by 0.8 if you have a 20% reduction. So you would take 80 damage from a 100 damage bomb instance if you had that. But if you had a second 20% damage reduction to bomb Curio, it would multiply that remaining damage by 8. It tackles them sequentially. It's a multiplicative equation, not an additive one. So we would end up taking 64% of the resulting damage which is 4% less effective than it promises on paper. And then if we had a third curio of that type, we'd multiply it by 0.8 again, and we would end up taking 51.2% of the damage, whereas on paper we were ostensibly promised to take only 40% of the damage. So my recommendation is if you really have a damage type that is annoying the shit out of you, like bombs or something like that, take at maximum 2 of that type. Because you'll only lose 4% effectiveness versus, you can see in this case, we are losing 11.2% effectiveness by that multiplicative thing over if we were to diversify, we could take 20% less damage to bombs, 20% less damage to flamers, 20% less damage to mutants or something, I don't know, whatever else. But more likely just take 2 defenses and then swap something else in that third one, and you'll get a little bit more out of it. All right, so the bombs are all in there. And I already talked about block. All right, so down here in C tier is stuff that it is usable. It gives you a tangible benefit in the game. It is incredibly questionable and dubious as to whether it is anything you'd want to ever have on a curio, because we are limited to only 3 things. And you can see right up here that pretty much all the classes have it figured out. Toughness, CDR, and stamina regen are nigh mandatory. So I would highly recommend these. These down here are like, I don't know what you're doing, dude. Revive on all of them, again, never really comes up. You could use your ultimate, your CDR, to get that off instead. It's even worse on Oghren, because Oghren can just brute force a revive. He can't be interrupted during interactions, so he could just take some damage, to his health. He can have his stamina fully broken and have no block left, and he will just still pull the revive off. So there's literally no use on that. Yeah, it'll take an extra second, but you're still up. HP is usable but dubious on veterans and psychers, as well as I think flamers are of dubious usefulness on veteran and Oghren. Veteran is, again, he's an old man, he gets winded. Sometimes you'll find yourself out of stamina in weird situations and you might not be able to get out and around that flamer line that's been painted underneath you. Oghren is wide, so that line that gets painted is harder for him to escape. It's the only reason I put it there. And I also put gunners for Oghren just because they will shoot you a little bit more than everybody else, so of dubious usefulness. Corruption also falls into this tier for the veteran and psyker. Corruption damage is not very common. Most players, especially difficulties 5 and above, very rare to see anyone collecting grimoires, and all sources of corruption, including grimoires, are flat point based, not percentage based. So for instance, a Poxburster does 100 health damage and corrupts 50. So if you have more HP, then your percentage of corruption you take is less. And the same thing applies to grimoires. You'll notice that Oghrens that they have 300 base HP, they will have only a tiny fraction of their HP corrupted by holding a grimoire, versus if you are a veteran or a psyker, it might be actually dubiously useful to use a corruption resistance, because a single grimoire on a team will corrupt almost half of your HP if you have no additional HP in there. Also dubiously useful, toughness regen. In fact, I just put this one in C tier to taunt Mr. L and tell him that it's maybe kind of usable, but only on Zealot, only for loners, etc., etc. And then D tier stuff down here. Toughness regen for pretty much everybody. Gunner resistance for everyone except for Oghren. Corruption for Zealot and Oghren because they have so much base HP, and Zealot has, a whole fucking talent that gets rid of corruption. And then finally, D tier for everything for the rest of the time. Snipers, mutants, and hounds. This guy is completely avoidable and literally shows you where and makes a sound for when he's going to shoot. These two do next to no damage. I have no idea why you would want to take 60% less of 1 damage. It's not that challenging. So there you go. That's everything for the upper echelon of the meta. Pretty much agrees with Mr. L's video. Again, like I said, no surprises here. Now, let's talk about my friends that are playing at difficulty 4 and below. And remember what I said before, which is that because the damage that you would take that would make you lose a mission is not going to come through a war of attrition where you're just taking little shots, little accidents every now and then. It's going to come through big catastrophic fuck-ups where a horde hits you like 7 times and beats you down. It becomes much more a question about how much effective HP we have. So for veterans and psychers, we want more toughness on our Curios, just because that is the primary way that we have any HP or we can stay alive is by having more of that stuff, and we get plenty of ways to regen it very easily. For zealots and ogrins, it's stacking HP, because at a certain point, these guys get so stupidly much HP that the lesser damage that goes out on difficulties 4 and below, there is literally not enough damage that's going to be dealt to you in the whole of the game that it can overcome the fact that the Ogren has over 520 HP, especially considering he can have a bunch of damage reduction on top of that. Also, remember that on lower difficulties, there are more Medicae charges on the Medicae stations. So these guys can be topping up basically for free at every interval. And that's just a ton more HP to work with. Zealot also has Revenant, which and Death Prevention, which is a talent that newer players almost always take on Zealot, especially considering it's over his most popular new player tree, the Charge. So that's extra HP gain back. You'll gain back more if you have more HP and all that good stuff. So yeah, these classes here are going to be in melee. They're going to take sloppy hits because these are players who have not yet fully learned the ins and outs of melee, and you do need to take hits in melee to understand how to not take hits in melee, right? This is going to give you more breathing room to work with, so you can learn the ins and outs. When I started playing Zealot, my first couple hundred hours, I was convinced that that HP was like the best, because I had seen someone do it and I was like, oh my god, this guy's got the shit beat out of him and he's still standing. And that was true, but now I'm good enough that I barely get the shit beat out of me in most games, and I don't run HP at all anymore. I feel like I get more out of toughness, which is true. So yeah, take this extra HP, you can get a little bit more of the shit beat out of you, but you'll learn a lot more in doing so. The rest of the stuff stays roughly the same in this tier. I do rank CDR still the best. It's, we're going to be using abilities on cooldown. Abilities are good. I think even newer players can agree. Stamina regen. This should be kind of a surprise, because look, again, we don't have any stamina in the main stuff on our Curios, because newer players don't get that much advantage out of stamina. They don't know how to like sprint flick and like slide all over the place. They don't know about push stabs and all that good stuff. The one thing they might be using stamina for, they can sprint and they can block, and that's about it. But the reason I'm putting stamina regen up here is because this is something that you are going to keep all game long, even when you evolve, because eventually, you're gonna get good enough that you will evolve to being in this tree right here, or this table right here. So I want players to get used to having that stamina regen, because that will always be your stamina regen for that class. And having a good internal measure of how where my stamina is at any given time without even having to look is really, really good. And eventually, you'll be like, okay, I've been sprinting, like your internal clock will be like, I've been sprinting for a bit, I need to take a breather. And you'll glance down at your stamina, you'll be like, yeah, I'm right. So yeah, stamina regen, because you're always going to have it, let's go ahead and work it into the build right now. It's just that good. Sprinting is still good, surprising no one. Toughness is still good, even on these classes. Again, just more effective HP. You're going to be taking hits in melee because you're playing sloppy, because you're new, and that's okay. Let's give you some extra padding to work around that. I rank block more highly for veteran and psyker in this tier list here, just because I think that veterans and psychers, probably if they've been leveling at that, they haven't had as much experience in melee gameplay as these other two classes have. These two classes are probably more comfortable at this point in their experiential journey at just like brawling their way through any situation. Like I remember playing with the Antax and just being like, oh, something hit me? Well, I'm going to hit it back 5 times as hard, and I've got a ton of HP to work with, so who fucking cares? Veteran and psycher don't have that much HP to work with, and they might not be melee experience. So in order to get themselves out of a sticky situation and get to a distance where, maybe their allies can help them, or they can start casting or shooting or reload again, they might want to block and dodge their way out of that situation. And then the rest of the tree is pretty much the exact same thing. I think that the rest of this experience is roughly generic. This stuff is just so bad that in general I don't recommend it. Actually, I will make one change here. I do think Gunner damage resistance can move up to B tier for Ogren, because especially for newer Ogren players, you are going to find yourself getting picked on a lot. in fact, it might be at the top of B tier for newer Ogren players. You're gonna find yourself getting picked on a lot, and especially by like gunners and stuff like that. And you don't yet have the skills to know how to slide. You don't know the level geometries to like go around and flank gunner positions and all that good stuff. It's just gonna be good to have that extra damage reduction when they break through, when they inevitably break your toughness and start shooting you directly in the face. And that's the rest of it, guys. So, what do you think? Is this good transformative content, or am I just being a Mr. XQC and leeching off of my friend Mr. L? Who knows? But I felt like I had something to say here. Hopefully this helps a lot of you guys. I get messages every day from people who are playing on this difficulty, and I am not by no means saying that this list is wrong. This list is 100% right. This is 100% what Mr. L and I agree upon. I had no disagreements when I was watching his video. So this is 100% good stuff. But this right here, I think this is more down my line of experiential stuff, and I'd like to, advise those players because you're still learning. And if I tell you to, you player with 50 hours, if I tell you to go and put on only the best gear, if I tell you to use a dueling sword is a lot harder to use than like an Antax or something like that. So I want to set you up with the easiest possible way to play through these missions. And then over time, you can swap out the easy to use stuff for the optimal stuff. And that's the goal here. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And Mr. E out. Bye.